I went from, pretty powerful woman in my world to somebody that is now a sick person.
Hello, and welcome to a new episode of the Peter O. Esteves Show. This is your host, Peter O. Esteves. Welcome to a new episode, and today I have none other than Christine de la Rosa. Hello, Christine. Welcome to the Peter O. Esteves Show.
Thank you so much, Peter. I'm excited to be here.
I am excited to have you here. You and I recently met at Southwest by Southwest, and what an incredible panel you were part of on the cannabis space. It was really a pleasure to meet you, and you were so informative and so involved and so much knowledge and powerful that I could not resist but to have you on our podcast and bring your knowledge and information to our community. So let me start by introducing you properly and talking a little bit about your bio. Okay, you are the national co-founder and CEO of the People's Ecosystem Company. Okay. And you were recently named one of the 22 cannabis leaders who will shape the industry in 2022. In 2021, you were on the list of the top 10 women to watch for in the industry, luminaries and rising stars. In 2020, one of the 35 most influential women in the cannabis industry. And the list goes on and on and on and on and on. But one of the most important things about you, Christine, is that you have spent the last 20 years or so in system database architect for telecom. Throughout your career, you were entitled in worlds between corporate and community. You have been a social entrepreneur that has spent most of your adult life building businesses and creatively engaging and employing local communities that surround them. You have also operated multiple businesses, but you had a debilitating disease that actually took you to the cannabis industry. So let's start right there. Tell us a little bit about that.
So sure, I want you to imagine it's like 2007 and I'm at the top of my career as a database architect. I pretty much can take any job, get any job. And at this time I'm working for Verizon Wireless and I start to get sick. I start getting sick. I'm starting to have symptoms. And so I go to the doctor and the doctor's like, yeah, you're great. You're fine. There's nothing wrong with you. You're just, you think you're sick, which happens a lot of times to women and especially women of color, especially Latinas and Black women. So for 3 years, at this point, I'm living in Dallas. I get transferred by Verizon Wireless to work at their network operations center in Walnut Creek, California. I moved to Oakland. And I'm getting sicker and sicker. Now I'm going to another set of doctors. They can't figure it out either. And on Thanksgiving Day of 2010, I have, while driving to go to a Thanksgiving dinner, a pulmonary embolism in my car. Wow. While I'm driving down the 880 in California in Oakland. And I go to the hospital and, they're like, hey, we're really worried you almost died. And you might still could die because you have these blood clots that are just floating in your body, wanting to hit your heart, your lungs. So they put me immediately into intensive care, and I'm there for about 7 days. And so I went from, pretty powerful woman in my world, in my business, in my company, to somebody that is now a sick person. And that's like a shift. It shifts like that, right? This is when they tell me, oh, we finally figured out what's wrong with you. You have systemic lupus, and this is going to be a debilitating disease, for the rest of your life. And I try to go back to work. I make it about 2 months before I get so sick that I can't get out of bed. And so for the next 5 years, Peter, I am in a bed. I am taking 11 medications a day, wow. 6 of them for the lupus, 5 of them for pain. So here I am. I'm like on prednisone, terrible. Gabapentin, terrible. Lyrica, terrible. So those are the things that are keeping me alive. I go to the hospital once a month to get an infusion. But the 5 other drugs are opioids.
Wow.
I have tramadol, hydrocodone, hydromorphine, Oxycontin, and fentanyl patches at any moment because I'm in so much pain from my disease. And so I do that for 5 years and I don't get better. I have to stop working. I'm pretty much bedridden. I don't go to a grocery store. Everything gets called in for me. It's just a really very deep and dark time for me. And thinking like, this is it. Like, this is how I die. I die, in my home, in the dark, in a lot of pain. And then on January 1st, for some reason, holidays are a big deal, of 2015, I was like, maybe I could find something alternative. And so I started looking. I'm thinking it's going to be like mushrooms and reishi and lion's mane, but I keep coming back to cannabis. Cannabis keeps showing up. And this is 2015. There's not a lot of stuff on the internet about cannabis, right? In 2015. So I decided to go ahead and try it. And I went to a local dispensary. I bought up a bunch of stuff, edibles, vapes, flour, tinctures, and I just started trying everything. But one of the things that happened in the trying of everything is what I was able to get to a regimen of cannabis, of CBD and THC that helped me get off all of the pills. So I've got 9 months. I stopped taking all 11 pills, including the pills for lupus. And I stopped going to get the Benlysta treatment at the hospital. And all of a sudden I could walk, I could think, I could move, I could start a business, I could do this, I could do that. All the things that I couldn't do because I was under so much medical care was cleared up by this holistic plant.
Wow.
And so to this day, 7 years later, I use very much the similar regimen. Now I still have lupus. You don't get rid of your lupus, but when I have a flare, I don't reach for Oxycontin. I reach for an indica, or I reach for something that has this much CBD or CBG or CBG or so, or whatever the different terpenes are that I need, CBN. And so that's how I treat my lupus now. And so this is a big deal because I could have easily, now I could walk. I didn't need a cane. I didn't have to stay in bed. I could have gone back to my other job. I could have gone back to making all the money that I was making beforehand, which was not bad, right? And I couldn't do it because there's so many Latinas. Latinas are affected much earlier on in life with lupus. Black women have the most highest rate of lupus. And here we are taking all of this synthetic medication to try to treat our lupus, and it doesn't really help us. Wow. And I'm afraid to take something that's holistic, because in our communities, in our Latino communities, in our Black communities, if you use cannabis in the Latino communities, you're a lazy Mexican. That's what I was told. Sure. If you use that similarly in other cultures, you could be called a thug. You could be called, there's a whole idea of what cannabis is when it's actually our ancestral medicine. My grandmother used it. My great-grandmother used it. We use all different types of plant medicine. And so I got mad and I was like, I need to be in the cannabis industry, because if I was afraid to go and use cannabis for 5 years, I could have been not sick for 5 years. My 5 highest earning years, I could have been working if I had known better.
Wow. What an incredible and powerful story. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about that because, I grew up, I'm a little bit older than you, but I grew up in that same generation where marijuana, cannabis, okay. Yeah. If you used it, you were a pothead, you were a marihuano, okay. Yep. You were a thug. You were
lazy. You didn't have ambition.
Yeah, you were stoner. Right. We can go back to Beavis and Butthead. We can go back to Ching and Chong and all that commercialized version of what marijuana used to be. And you said a couple of key things. You said, this is what our ancestors used as healing medicine, as practices. I have lived through a ayahuasca experience. I'm a firm believer of the plant medicine. I'm a firm believer of anything that is for medicinal purposes. I'm a firm believer of anything that is for spiritual purposes. I have experimented with some of, with ayahuasca more than anything else, because I wanted to be able to reach that state of clarity, to be able to dig deep into those states where I could find the part of me that has not been discovered, okay? Or I could dissolve or destroy or dismantle things that were holding me back as I understand them. Now, why is it that has changed? Why was it that for example, and I'm going to use this as an example, cocaine was so normalized in the Caucasian community, but marijuana was so negatively used in the Black and brown communities? How did that happen? How did that take place?
Well, I think it took place because the whole idea of the prohibition of cannabis was to create a prison pipeline for Black and brown people into the prison system. And that was not the same as with cocaine in the Caucasian. That wasn't it. Like, that was a synthetic. People understood that. But the cannabis prohibition was specifically to create that pipeline as a way in which to incarcerate a lot of Black and brown people in the US. So that's what the difference is. They weren't trying to incarcerate white people. They weren't trying to incarcerate Black and brown people. Makes
perfectly good sense. So how does Christine, that has a debilitating disease, that is being kept a prisoner of her health by legal medicine, by legal, okay?
There we go. I like that. I like it.
quote, right? By legal medicine, by FDA approved medicine, suddenly is well and doing much better, has a strict regimen to a cannabis-based ritual and practice that has helped her regain her freedom from her health. How does she go into becoming the national co-founder of the People's Ecosystem Company?
Well, it's a very funny story, at least for me. So we were in what's called the legacy market. People know it as the illicit market. People know it as the illegal market. So when I got better, I was like, there are so many people like me who are of color, who have lupus or arthritis or have some other autoimmune disease. And they were not going to the store like me. I didn't go to one of the legal stores in Oakland. And there was a little piece on the books in the municipal code where you could have a collective. So if you had a collective, you didn't have to have a license to actually dispense medicine as long as everybody belonged to your collective. Wow. And I thought, well, I have found my regimen. I wonder if we can find regimens for other people so that they can get better as well. And so we started really small. I thought we would maybe service 100 people like that, like people that I personally knew, or that my partner personally knew, or my business partners personally knew. And within the first 3 months, we had 4,500 people.
Wow.
In the collective. Yeah.
Wow.
And I had to think about that. That was in 2016. And I had to start really thinking about what that was going to look like. Why is that? Like, why are we in the middle of 8 legal medical dispensaries and 4,500 people think that coming up to my closet, which was the closet, was the way to go? And what we realized pretty early on was that there weren't people that looked like us in those dispensaries, normally speaking. Like, not every dispensary. There weren't people who were sick who had the knowledge for themselves, what they did that worked for them. Now that might not work for somebody else, but you could kind of tell them. There were people who were veterans, people who had been formerly incarcerated for cannabis, who don't feel comfortable going into a cannabis store that wasn't run by people of color. And so that's when we decided to transition into the legal market. And that was when I really started my cannabis journey in terms of creating a company, because that was we had to think about it. I had been a database architect. I'd owned 2 restaurants with my friend Charlene, who's my co-founder. I had a art gallery in San Francisco, but I had never run a cannabis business other than this legacy one. And so we really had to learn. And so when we transitioned into legacy, out of legacy into legal, that's when we really decided that we needed to be here because there's so few people of color in the space.
Wow. There's so many points that I want to touch right there. One of them, a collective, right? So basically the collective was at the time set in the books, in the law, in the legislation that allowed you to commercialize, to dispense cannabis products through a group of people without having an actual license or a storefront, okay? Yeah. What we would have called back in the old days, a drug dealer. Okay. But this gave you the license to do that. Okay. Yeah. And I didn't mean that to be insultive. It's just that.
Oh, no insulting here. Don't worry. I will tell you, we weren't the only, there was probably about 30 collectives in downtown Oakland when we were operating. So you could go into somebody.
This is so important. It's so interesting, right? Because now you could have the grandmother, the grandfather, the aunt, the uncle, the military person, the guy that maybe had been charged with possession of marijuana or distribution of marijuana, but not uses it for medical purposes, could come to this collective and obtain this without being fearful, because there was somebody on the other side that they could relate to. Exactly what you and I were talking about before we got into the podcast, about personal development space, right? Yeah. If we don't see somebody that looks like us, that talks like us, that walks like us, the culture identifies with us. In the brown and Black communities, we are still afraid to do business, to speak up. The imposter kicks in. the fear kicks in, the insecurities kicks in. And this is not denigrating any other culture. This is just the fact of how we have been raised, and we have not broken to those taboos that allow us to become mainstream in every areas of our lives. And this is a perfect example. So you take a business, you take a legacy business, and just for purpose of understanding for the audience, legacy business is somebody that had been in the cannabis business, perhaps illegally prior to the legalization of it, right?
That's correct.
Okay, so now you formalize and you create the people's ecosystem. So what does the people ecosystem do today, besides empowering incredible women like yourself and your partner?
Well, you know what? We do a lot of different things. We have a management company that we help manage other people's businesses, not necessarily the people's businesses. We also have our own operations. We just got our dispensary manufacturing and consumption license in New Mexico. So we also apply for licenses. We do a lot of advocacy work, reading through all of the government regulations through all of the states and also federal to make sure our people are well informed. We have broken off another company called the People's Group, which is a fund that funds specifically BIPOC and women-led companies in the cannabis space, because one of the hardest things to do is to get access to capital. Okay. If you look at last year.
Did you say BICAP? I didn't understand that.
I said BIPOC, Black, Indigenous people of color.
Okay.
Yes, because it's very hard for these groups to get access to capital. When you're looking at how much capital was released last year, which is billions and billions of dollars, Latinos, Blacks, and women only got 2.4% of that, wow, which is very little.
Right.
And so you have all of these people of color coming into the cannabis space through social equity, through, their own regular finances, and they're holding these golden tickets that are called licenses. But because they don't have access to capital, they will never realize that golden ticket. So we have to organize our own capital. And this is one of the things that I might be getting off on a little tangent, but this is one of the things that we have to really sort of educate our communities, our Latinx communities on, is that there's a lot of money in the Latino community, and they're not investing in cannabis because of all of this propaganda that you and I were talking about, because of the stigma around it. And what's happening is that everybody else is investing. Like,
we're being left behind.
Yeah, we're being left behind. So we're going to end up with, it's already legal in Mexico, right? So you're going to end up not having invested at a time when it was cheaper to invest. You're going to end up investing at a time when it's more expensive to invest, and you'll have lost that train because of propaganda that was fed to you. Not even truth, not even facts, but just propaganda. And I think that that's super important to mention, because there are all of these Latinos, there are all of these Black people, there's all of these women holding these licenses that can't have access to capital, which is why we started the People's Group, so that we would be able to invest in those companies that had harder times for access to capital.
I love that. Let's talk a little bit about that taboos and how do we break through that? Because sure, you and I are both people of color, right?
Yep.
Black and brown. You and I have, I'm a firm believer that you cannot achieve external success when you're having an internal battle, right?
That's right. I agree with that.
And I think a lot of us just coming from the social condition that we come from a lot of the lies and taboos that were fed to us, that is key, okay? Yeah. It started at a government level, passed on through the religious institutions, and then brought down into our households by our parents, okay? Now, today we live in an age of information. We live in an information where we get over 50,000 sound bites of information each and every day. In a week, we get more information than our parents and grandparents got throughout their entire life, okay? So there's access to knowledge and information, but we need to be able to tap to it. What is it that we can do as a collective, as a community, to be able to help the younger generation, the millennials, the Gen Zer, and the generations to come forward to? What is it that we can do to inform them? Number one, that there's access, that there's powers and numbers. We're the Latino community, 60+ million and growing, okay? It represents 40% of the US population, and it continues to grow, okay? And the reality is that a melting pot of communities of different cultures is going to outgrow any majority group in the U.S. by 2025. Okay, so the reality is that there's a lot of power and a lot of information available, but how do we begin to create messages, informative messages that prepare the Gen Zers, the millennials, to be able to not fall in the same pattern of mistakes that our grandparents did, that our parents did? How do we break those taboos, Christine?
I think one of the biggest things to do just that, and I'm going to just this might sound a little bit callous, but it's financial literacy.
Be as callous as you want. This is a callous.
It's financial literacy. The biggest issue in our communities is that we don't have financial literacy. We don't understand how to invest. We don't understand how to save. We don't understand, because you have to think there's a history of this, right? When Black people gathered wealth, they bombed them in Tulsa, right? So there's a mentality where when we get money, we must spend the money because we don't know how long they'll let us keep the money, right? And we have to shift that time set, because here is the truth about what's going on. Millennials of color account for 45% of the population. Gen Z is going to account for 52% of the population. Every single one of them is carrying a supercomputer in their pocket. That's an iPhone or a Google Pixel or whatever they have. So financial literacy and understanding how your dollar works, not just I'm going to go to McDonald's and buy $1 burger, but what if you took that dollar and went to Claudia's, which is one of my favorite Mexican places here, and you give them the dollar for something very similar, equally delicious, but that's keeping it within community. How you spend your money matters. It really matters. And that's the financial literacy. Not only how do you save, how do you invest, but how do you spend in a way that's ethical and good for your community, not my community, your community, wherever you're located at, because that community really relies on your dollar. And I think that's how you do it, is getting them to understand those three things.
I love that. But I think there's also, and correct me if I'm wrong, I also believe that there is a conflict. Okay, so we have Gen Zers, we have millennials, and then we have the baby boomers and the older generations, right? And
wait a minute. You can't forget Gen X. I'm Gen X.
Gen X. Of course, Gen X.
They always forget us.
But there's a conflict between the generations, because you have a Gen Zer, a millennial, a Gen X, okay? And the belief system of a baby boomer and older generations is so strong and so rooted, okay, that if, for example, if a grandchild comes and talks to the baby boomer grandfather or whatever generation he is beyond the baby boomer, right? Mm-hmm. And he talks about cryptocurrency or Bitcoin or cannabis for that matter. What is the reaction that grandkid is going to receive from that grandparent? For most cases, if they're not mainstream informed, the Gen Zer, the baby boomer, the older generation, they're going to shut down any new idea that grandkid does, right? So
the difference is that the grandkid has that supercomputer. So my parents did not have a supercomputer. So if their parents said, this is how the world is, they believed this is how the world is. And even me, like, I remember the first computer coming into my home was like a TRS-80, like back in the 80s, right? And that was the first moment that we started to get information from outside our familial circles. And I think that is the huge thing, because I can go to my baby boomer dad and say, hey, Dad, I'm going to be doing this, the People's DAO, this cryptocurrency bank. He's going to say, that sounds ridiculous. And I'm going to be like, sure, to you, it sounds ridiculous. I'm not going to disrespect him, but I have the supercomputer that tells me why it's not ridiculous. And I think that's the biggest shift that we have and that we're seeing currently, is that shift between, yes, we respect our elders, but we also have access to this information.
I love that. And thank you for clarifying that, because you also got to admit that you're not the average Joe. You're a unicorn, Christine.
Thank you.
You're a unicorn in your space. You're a woman. Every taboo that there's supposed to be in your space, you have broken. Okay, so by all means, you're a unicorn, and most individuals and most Latinos and most African Americans most of us still walk with that fear and that insecurity and the imposter syndrome, because it has not only been what our parents taught us, what religious taught us. I mean, I remember when I got my first job at USAA right out of high school, okay, as an entry-level position, my mom said, take care of that job. Rock the boat. Cuida tu trabajo, mijo.
Sí, todo.
Yeah. Cuida tu trabajo, mijo. You can maybe retire there. You don't have to work. Well, I was like you, a unicorn. I didn't want to be at the same place, stuck behind a desk for 30 years to be promoted gradually whenever a supervisor decided that I was worthy of a promotion. I think that one of the many qualities that my parents gave me, okay, was a hard work ethic, okay, and to be resourceful. And I think if we utilize those tools, okay, resourcefulness, that's not necessarily mean that I have resources. It means that I have the ability to be resourceful enough to locate resources or the individuals that are going to help me locate the resources that I need to do whatever I need to do. And of course, I had an uncanny faith that I inherited from my mother. Okay. My mom was that lady on her rocking chair praying for her 13 children, every single one of them, for hoping that none of them will make it to jail, stay out of jail. and thank God we all did. But that's the reality. And those are the taboos that we need to break through. Now, from a legislator perspective, from a legal perspective, how is the people's ecosystem supporting legislation or lobbying for laws, or what is it that you guys are doing there?
So we do a lot. We work right now with legislators in California, New York, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas. And what we do there is really lobby. And we also did a couple of lobby days with legislators at the federal level back in February. What we're really trying to do is get them to understand the value of the cannabis industry as being one of the very first industries that people of color and women will be able to really excel in, and also create jobs and wealth for their families and communities. And so what we do is we start with reading legislation. We start by reading proposed regulation. Coming from California, we've seen a lot of the pitfalls that have happened to us in California. So informing people like, hey, you think that this is a good piece of legislation, but here are the pitfalls that we had over here in California. So maybe we rethink how you're going to do that. So that's how we support our legislators, but we also support the people on the ground. We have a lot of grassroots organizers in our realm that we support, making sure they have knowledge around what cannabis can and cannot do. Because sometimes people like to say cannabis is like going to be the end all be all, and it's not. It's just it's an industry.
Right.
And it's not even a tech industry. It's a commodity industry. It's an agricultural industry. And so, really explaining to legislators, federal and state, this isn't a cash cow. This is like farmers. People are farming this product. So yes, we should pay taxes. No, you shouldn't have exorbitant taxes, because when you do that, people just continue to buy in the illegal market where it's cheaper.
Wow. So let's talk about the resistance you're getting from legislators. Yeah. What the resistance are you getting back? And then I want to talk about the farming industry and how would it benefit from it?
Yeah. So the biggest resistance we get is around safe banking, which is just crazy to me. The fact that legal cannabis companies cannot safely bank in regular banks for regular amounts of fees. Like right now, if I could bank at, like, let's say a Chase, my fee would be like $25 a month. Right now, I don't have access to that. So I have to go to another bank, sort of an offside bank, like a community bank. They charge me $350 a month just to bank there.
Gouging, right? My strategy.
Gouging. So that is the biggest thing. And the biggest thing for me, especially at the federal level, we have the opportunity to speak with Cory Booker. And, he's one of the folks who's like, if there's no social equity, there's no safe banking. We're not going to do one without the other. And what I'm trying to really, and I think what a lot of us in the industry who are operators are trying to get them to understand, is that having access to safe banking is actually social equity. People don't believe that, but I do, because I'm an operator. So when I hear somebody say that's not true, I'm like, yeah, it is true, because 6 months ago, somebody stole someone else's car in my community and ran into my building to try to get access to the safes because they know that there's cash there.
Sure.
Luckily for us, we had moved the cash a couple of days before, so there was no cash. But this didn't just affect me as a property owner or the landlord who has the building, but it also affected the community because now somebody doesn't have a car. That car was left at the scene of the crime because why would you take it? You just smashed a car, it doesn't move anymore. So if people knew that we could bank and there's no money in there, like it's like when you go to McDonald's, like there's only $25 in the thing, you know, like what I'm saying?
Sure.
But we don't have access to that. So I'm a Latina led company. I had to pay for that to get fixed. I had to then, work with my community to make sure that we did stuff to make it safer. I wouldn't have to do those things if I just had access to the basic necessity of a bank. And why couldn't we have access to that? Well, we can't have access to that because federal legalization has said no. And folks like Cory Booker are trying to use safe banking as a hook for social equity when they don't realize you can do both. They don't have to be tied to one another.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So now let's talk about the benefit to the farming industry that really has been suffering for the many years. So what would be the benefit from the cannabis industry to the farming industry, particularly in areas that depend on farming, South Texas, for example, many other communities?
I tell people one of the things that I think is the most amazing thing is hemp. I mean, if everybody who needed to grow hemp is like beyond amazing. Like it can be paper, it can be clothing, it can be all of these different things. But the biggest thing it can be is the cleaner of air.
Wow.
And if I was the government and I knew where we were in this catastrophe of global warming, I would just like they did before. They've paid farmers to not grow stuff. They've paid farmers to grow stuff. So I'm thinking, why wouldn't you use all of this land that has been farmed and put hemp crops in there to not only help regenerate the soil, but regenerate the air?
Wow.
And this is where it would be so amazing for farmers.
Wow, I love that. Now let's talk about Texas. Where is Texas at with the legalization of cannabis? And how do you see, Texas is losing revenue to Oklahoma and to other bordering states that people, all they have to do is cross a borderline or take a quick, Southwest flight there.
Yeah.
Get whatever they need and come back home. So where is Texas at and what resistance is Texas getting?
I think Texas is pretty far behind. I think that there's a possibility that it could speed up depending on the changes in the legislation. And that's not even like Democrat, Republican. That's just changes of people's thoughts. Maybe somebody gets put in there that's pro-cannabis, not against cannabis. The thing that's really hard, and I have to tell this to people because people are like, I don't understand. Texas is such a big state. That would be so much revenue. And I'm like, this is an oil state. They don't care about your cannabis.
They got plenty of revenue.
Yeah, they don't care about your revenue. Like you're like, you could have $200 million in tax revenue. And they're just like, I got like $5 billion in revenue from oil. So it's hard. That's not an incentive in Texas. So the thing is like, what would incentivize the Texas legislature to actually make it legal? Because it's not going to be the tax money. It's just not going to be that. And I don't know what that is. I don't know. When you have all the money that you need, it's hard to incentivize people to move forward. But I do see some movement in this legislation, this next legislator. I think that there's going to be some movement that's going to be happening. And I say that because I see that people are buying land to put cultivations on. And maybe they know something I don't, but why would you buy land to put in big cultivations in Texas unless you knew something was coming?
Yeah, absolutely. So now let's talk about Southwest by Southwest.
Yes.
Where you and I met. Tell me your biggest takeaway, your biggest experience, and what are you looking forward to in 2023?
I think one of the biggest things was just being in front of actual people. Like, although I really love Zooms because I don't have to travel as much, it was so nice to be in person, don't you think? So nice to be able to physically, it's just, when I think about like the metaverse and meta and all that, I get that, but I don't see that not being able to physically be in space with people, which makes you be in community with them, right? You're in community with them. That was actually the biggest thing. Like all of the panels were great. Everything that South by did was great, but the actual just being in space and in community with people was just real. After 2 years of not, was just a really big thing.
Absolutely, it was like kids played out at the kindergarten to the break room to the playground. Yeah, I mean that's how I felt. I couldn't go to enough places quick enough. It was just like, oh, who do I meet next? What panel do I hear? What panel of this? Yeah. It was really, really exciting. And I want to touch a little bit about the metaverse and about technology, because I think a lot of times there's a misconception of what technology and social media and the metaverse should be. And the reality is that if we look at it as an extension of who we are, rather than who we are or who we become, as an extension, use it as a tool. Use it as a tool to expand your reach, to create, to expand your brand, to expand who you are and what you want to learn, but not live it and not become it. Okay. Right. Otherwise, it becomes another addiction. You know, what's your feedback on that?
I agree with you. I think that I love the metaverse. I'm a data person. I'm a technology person. So definitely my wheelhouse. But also, I think that we lose something, you know, when we cannot physically be in space with each other. And I don't know, maybe that's something that's coming down the pike before, you know, before I leave this earth, but I hope it doesn't, because I really do think being in 3D space with people is so important. And I agree with you. The metaverse should not replace the way we live. It should augment the way we live.
Absolutely. So what are some closing words for our audience? What would it be something that you want to remember about Christine?
I would say what I would want somebody to remember about me is that there's a different way to handle illness, and that you should do your investigation on your own. For many years, being from Texas, I relied on my doctors and I believed them. And it's not that you shouldn't believe them or rely on them, but it is an art. And so if you're suffering, if you're in pain, if you feel like you're living half a life, which is what I felt like I was doing, look for alternatives and look to cannabis. It sometimes is the answer. Not always, not for everybody, but really take a hold of your own health. One of the things in your 5 pillars is health, right? And health is so important for me. And health is important because that is how we live a good life, is if we have our health. So if you're not feeling healthy after taking 11 medications like I was, really try to figure out an alternative way if you can. And cannabis is a great place to start.
Love it. Christine de la Rosa, an excellent Latina, a unicorn, and an incredible woman. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you so much.